Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Again, my name is Spencer Howard. I'm the Director of Client Success here at GSI. I'm a career-long ERP consultant. I've spent all of my career in professional services, working with customers and prospects just like you to help you be successful on your ERP platforms. With GSI, I'm over the NetSuite practice. Previously to GSI, I was a senior director of professional services at NetSuite for the better part of a decade. I created the Solutions Principles Group, which scopes implementations and works with customers and prospects to be successful in their implementations. There's two pieces of this, as you obviously know. You buy your software, and then you have to work with a team to implement it so it supports your business functions, and I have a deep experience in that. NetSuite has a branded implementation methodology called Suite Success. I was one of the folks that helped to get that off of the ground. I've been in the products area for the bulk of my career, both with NetSuite and with SAP previous to that. So manufacturing, wholesale distribution, retail, anything where there's an asset being sold, that's an area of expertise. However, I've overseen implementations of all kinds in ERP and in NetSuite. But we'll get started with this. I've got a handful of slides that goes over really just 10 steps, 10 easy to remember steps to get you guys prepared for a successful NetSuite implementation. And we'll get started with that right now. So the first thing is to assemble a great team. Internal to your organization, I'm sure that it's somewhat obvious who needs to be part of that team. It's not just SMEs, subject matter experts, SMEs, but also folks that can help drive that implementation. A couple of pieces to this is a good project manager. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be a full-time project manager, and it does not need to be a project manager that has any experience in ERP or even outside your organization. It's really just someone to herd the cats, right? So someone to make sure that meetings are being attended, that chores that are being put upon you by your implementation partner are being followed up on. But those subject matter experts, those folks that know really at the core how the business works, is incredibly important to put on your team. Somebody to lead, somebody that knows your finances, someone that knows your products, someone that knows your supply chain, and then someone to kind of bring all those voices together are important people to have on your team. Also a sense of energy. You're going to want folks that are excited about this transformation for your business and can help and put that energy into that implementation. So I mentioned a project manager. Again, this should be somebody that's a figurehead in the company, somebody that has the internal reputation to be able to drive some of this stuff. As the project goes on, some folks are going to feel that that they don't need to be they need to attend every meeting, and that may be true. But someone internal to your organization that knows the folks that are going to be part of this team, someone that has a relationship with them, someone that has the authority to drive these things, because some meetings will need to be attended by some folks and others by other folks. But you're going to need to keep that straight internal to your organization. So having a figurehead, someone that is reflective of the brand of this project. And so making sure that schedules are being kept and that we're moving forward internal to your organization is extremely important. A steering committee. Steering committee is extremely important because of decision-making is going to be key to a successful implementation. You're going to want a group of folks that, if you have a larger project team within your organization, you're going to run across decisions. As ERP is implemented, new business processes and new decisions about how business is being done are going to be presented. And sometimes a larger group can't make those decisions. So having a steering committee, someone that is focused on how the new ERP is going to support this business and has the power to make those decisions and make those decisions quickly, is going to be incredibly important as part of your successful implementation team. Empower a steering committee to make those command decisions during implementation. And make sure that that steering committee has the right communication plan and collaboration tools in place to make those fast decisions. I've seen companies create their own kind of email chains that are specific to the projects. Maybe if you use Slack, you create a project communications channel, but anything where communication is moving back and forth and important decisions can be escalated to your steering committee, and those decisions being followed up on is incredibly important. Again, further to that, a communications plan. So the tools for a communications plan are important. As I mentioned, Slack, maybe an email trail, but also regular communications that your entire project team, including the steering committee and leadership, should meet weekly. Update should focus on your implementer and internal projects team status and tell what's coming up next. So you'll have an internal meeting that's specific to your organization about how the project's going, where it needs to be focused, and what decisions need to be made. You'll also meet with your implementation partner, and that might be NetSuite Professional Services, it might be an organization like GSI, but you'll meet with them regularly, and your project manager and project team will need to be part of that so that we can update you on what decisions are going to need to be made and what's coming in the next couple of weeks, so we can set priorities, follow up, and then also let your team know what's coming up in the next couple of weeks so they can prepare that time effectively. Also, a big thing, and this is a little bit of rah-rah as we refer to it, use an employee newsletter that updates your entire company for the need of the project. It builds on the excitement, shows how the ERP implementation will drive the company's future success. This is a little bit of change management. So there's this old saying that all change will be resisted. If you've got folks that are using your current system and they're using it, by rote, they know how to take a particular digit and put it into a particular field, and they know that's part of their job, but may not understand everything that's going on behind the scenes in your current system or the future system. Keeping them informed is a terrific way to kind of break down those barriers of change. Doing an ERP implementation is a stress on any business, and it's a stress on the folks in particular, especially if they think that their daily routine is going to be disrupted. That can be very disrupting for them. So making sure that you communicate with them in a company-wide newsletter, or maybe even an address. A good project team on larger implementations might hold pizza parties once a month to inform the entire staff of the company about what's going on with this ERP implementation. Everyone's going to have a little stress around this, so underlining why it's important for your business to thrive. Most ERP implementations are for very specific reasons. You're trying to solve a business problem. You're trying to work with new companies. You're trying to open up to new markets, or your current ERP is restricting you from doing the business as best you can. So making sure that you get that message out to every single person in your organization, so that the water cooler talk is an excitement about how the business is growing and not some kind of administrative pain that everybody's going through. That's just framing the conversation. And as silly as it might sound, it is incredibly important to make sure everybody feels like that they have a voice in this and they're part of this change for your company. Keep it simple. The old way of implementing ERP was kind of a kitchen sink approach, right? You do everything in that first phase. But what has been a great advantage for SaaS ERP implementations, software as a service, ERP implementations, and ERP that's on a SaaS platform, is that you can do it in phases. And that first phase should be focused on simply replacing the functionality that you have now, and then also achieving those immediate goals for why you're swapping out the ERP. Phase 2 and phase 3 are important pieces for refining your ERP implementation so that you can become a disruptor in your industry. But making sure that you work with your implementation partner and working with your ERP publisher so that this first phase is as simple as possible. And an organization like GSI and even NetSuite Professional Services can work with you to make sure that you are biting off exactly as much as you can chew and not overcasting what you're trying to accomplish. Lots of ERP implementations have had trouble because the vision was too big. What they were trying to achieve was too big in too short of a time, or it was just too much for the organization to digest. So always keep an eye on what are we doing now in phase one, and then what can be put off to phase two, or what do we want to accomplish in those further phases. All good ERP, and NetSuite included, is an evolution of your business. And this doesn't just start and stop with your implementation. You need to be able to evolve on your platform as time goes on. Celebrate the milestones. In your project plan, you will have particular milestones in the implementation. So when when your design gets signed off on, or the initial configuration gets signed off on, these are milestones. The end of the initiation phase is a milestone. And ERP implementations can go for quite some time, and there is a such thing as implementation fatigue. But if you celebrate those interior milestones, the end of the first phase of phase one, so the initiation phase, or the configuration phase, or the testing phase, those little celebrations along the way reassure everybody that you're moving forward, that the implementation is getting done, and that there is success, and that your goals will be reached. So making your go live the sole focus, the only win in the project, is not necessarily the best way to execute on your implementations. Celebrate the little things, right? Because there will be a lot of milestones within your implementation model. An extremely important step is choose and train an administrator. Now, an administrator for NetSuite or a similar system, especially in today's day and age, doesn't necessarily need to be someone that has any IT experience or expertise. They don't need to know exactly how NetSuite is programmed or how the application is served. A good administrator is somebody that can see the business across the business and work with internal stakeholders to drive internal projects so that your ERP supports the growth of your company. So if you identify an administrator in the early stages of this project, sign that person up for administrator training. NetSuite in particular does a great job of administrator training. And that will be a fine, line on anyone's resume that they've administered a NetSuite. But again, I think there's a common knowledge or a common understanding that someone who's an administrator of an ERP system has to have some kind of IT or ERP expertise. That is absolutely not true. Once they understand the environment of NetSuite, they understand how business processes are supported in the software, they become great leaders and great communicators within your organization so that new ideas and new business processes can be brought to bear in the software. Good communicators are good administrators. People that can, again, herd the cats, be able to go to work through needs from all kinds of different departments and boil those down into things that are most important and create internal projects that are focused are the kinds of people that make great administrators. So someone that understands the business across the business, can drive the business, make for great administrators. And again, the training is good. I think more often than not in smaller and medium-sized companies, someone from the accounting department, maybe a CTO or a controller, more often than not ends up being an administrator. And that's not the worst choice in the world. From an accounting standpoint, you have a great idea of how the business moves through your ERP system. But it doesn't necessarily have to be someone from that organization, particularly if they don't have the bandwidth or the time to execute on those internal projects that are going to make your ERP really hum and turn you into a disruptor in your industry. Don't overlook user training and adoption. Again, a little note back to change management. So user training in a quick implementation can be as simple as having folks be part of the user acceptance testing phase of an implementation. That, in my estimation, is far too small of a footprint for user training and adoption. What you want to do is understand your organization and how they learn. How do they absorb information? And this can be in many different ways of being served up. It could be in a conference room. It could be, having somebody at the front of the table in a traditional classroom presentation, or it can be through videos. It can be through team leads. So, for instance, let's say you've got your AR and AP accounting crew. There's 10 of them, and you identify one of them to be that team's leader. That person might go through some intense training so that they can distribute their understanding, their knowledge to the people who sit around them or the people that work with them day in and day out on their tasks. And that way they have someone that they know to get more information from. Really, user adoption and training is more art than science. And so working with an organization like GSI, we'll work directly with you to design that user adoption and training piece. No new ERP, no new business systems are going to be effective unless your organization feels comfortable in them, understands how to execute their work in that new ERP, and also comes up with new ideas on how to do things more effectively so that we can bring efficiency to your organization. And again, make you an industry disruptor, make you more competitive in your industry. So rapid implementation models, again, can often overlook training because I think there's an idea out there that training is somehow a flexible piece of an implementation. Or we have business owners that say, well, my people are pretty smart, they'll pick it up. And they may very well pick it up. However, looking at your organization, looking at how they learn is a big piece of this. And it's also a cornerstone of a successful implementation. At the end of that implementation, that everybody has a good idea of how to execute on their work is going to be a bellwether of how well this implementation went. NetSuite, along with some other ERP systems, do a great job of building libraries for reference and research. And NetSuite in particularly does a great job of this, and it comes free with every single license of NetSuite. If you have a license of NetSuite and you're just a general user, additional training resources and activities are not an extra cost. Back in the day, on-premise ERP, SAP, and Oracle used to charge for additional training or actually accessing white papers or training guides. That is not the case with NetSuite or some of the more modern ERP systems. Also, NetSuite has something called Suite Answers built into it. At the top of the screen, it kind of works like a Google search, and you could put in any kind of phrase or term, and it will show you what materials they have to teach you about that function in NetSuite. So let's say during the implementation, we taught you how to cut checks, but we didn't go live for 3 months later, and maybe you've forgotten a little bit about what we taught you about cutting checks. If you put issuing checks into a search in NetSuite, it'll come up with a whole bunch of white papers, videos, all kinds of materials about how to refresh your memory about how to execute on that function. Optimizing your ERP. So this is where I talk a little bit about phase 2, phase 3, even phase 4. Your first phase of your implementation is really, again, going to be about replacing your current ERP and doing that in the most digestible way, the way that's going to be easiest for your company to adopt. But you do not want to lose momentum after that, because it's the phase 2, phase 3, even phase 4, and you're continuing effort to refine your ERP that's really going to be the difference maker for you becoming a more efficient, more effective organization, and one that's competing more effectively. So after your first phase, you might want to take a little bit of a breather. There is a such thing as implementation fatigue, but you're going to want to think about those further phases and think about how you're going to continue to evolve NetSuite to support that business. Another piece of this is NetSuite's continuing investment in their own R&D and their own development of the software. NetSuite's always coming out with new functions and features. Somebody in your organization should be keeping an eye on that to see if it applies to your business. And then again, using those new features to make your business that much better. Again, the message here is staying on top of this and never letting that momentum die. After your first phase of your implementation, you may have reached some big goals, but staying on top of it, having a constant eye on NetSuite, having a constant eye on your business needs, having someone look for, this is a little bit inefficient, and I think that we can solve this inefficiency by using either NetSuite where we're not using it already, or using NetSuite more effectively. And there's all kinds of professionals out there, including GSI, that can help you look at those business processes and bring more efficiency and more effectiveness. And then finally, selecting that implementation partner. So all kinds of different partners bring different types of skill sets, and you're going to want to make sure that you work with them to understand what they bring to the table. Some are better at some things than others. GSI is an implementation partner that focuses on client success. GSI is a partner in your IT and your business evolution, and we look at this through a business lens. While we have strong and deep technical resources to be able to make NetSuite do whatever you want, it's looking at this through a lens of the business. What is your business? What are you trying to achieve? And how are you going to use NetSuite as a tool to achieve that? Software is nothing more than a tool. It's how you use it in the business framework that is going to make the difference for you. So when you work with an implementation partner, make sure that you talk about those lofty goals of, I want my business to do X, and how are we going to use NetSuite as a tool to get there? Good consulting and a consulting partner and team that understands your business is as important, if not more important, than any expertise that they might have in NetSuite. So by following these steps outlined in this webinar, companies can position themselves for success both during a NetSuite ERP implementation and after the system has gone live. Putting the right people in place, doing the upfront homework, celebrating those wins, and optimizing the NetSuite ERP in subsequent phases will go a long way in ensuring ERP implementation success and minimizing the time it takes to start getting value from your system. That's an underlying mantra for NetSuite as well. NetSuite wants to get you onto the software so you're seeing your return on investment quickly, and GSI and other organizations can help you. One additional note about the partner community that GSI is a part of. Oracle NetSuite is working to move more of this consulting outside of the Oracle framework. So as any software company, SAP or big Oracle, they want partners to retain that expertise because we have the ability to work with you more closely. And we have the ability to understand your business and give you, I'm not a huge fan of this phrase, but that white glove approach where we can look at every detail and create an implementation model, and then also ongoing consulting that understands your business and again puts the tool of NetSuite in a place where it is a power tool for your business. And with that, we have a little bit of contact information here. I believe that our organization is going to send the details of this white paper, this presentation, actually began as a white paper that I wrote a couple of months ago. We'll send that out to each and every one of the folks that are on this presentation so that they can review that information. But if you follow those 10 steps, if you take ownership of your implementation from your side, I know from experience that your implementation will go smoother, your goals will be reached easier, and you'll be happier and find more success on your ERP platform. And with that, Mike, that's the end of my presentation.
Well, great. I really appreciate your time with that, Spencer. And I did get a few questions here for you. So,
sure.
The first one really is, every company's culture is different, but do you find that the companies going into an ERP implementation that are proactively doing it, seeing the need to do it and planned ahead, respond differently than the ones who are reacting to something, whether someone new came in and said, we have to do this, and everyone was kind of caught flat-footed? And nothing wrong with either of those, but is there a different way maybe to implement these 10 steps or to manage that? Or does it really matter?
It does matter a little bit. Yeah. So when everyone can see the need to transform the business, then you're going to have a lot more positive energy towards that. And your folks are going to adopt that software and that system. And most importantly, the change, they're going to adopt that a lot easier. If at the highest levels, you are being, cornered into a new ERP system. So for instance, in QuickBooks, it's hard to sell your company. It's hard to get a venture capital investment because QuickBooks doesn't do accounting in a way that is attractive for those organizations. So often senior leadership will say, let's get on to a better ERP system so that we can get more investment, so that we can report to our investors in a more effective way. And that might not be something that is easily understood, or even you want to have that information go out to your frontline folks. So in those instances, you want to build a story about why you're transforming to a new ERP system. It doesn't necessarily have to be a story that's not true, but you're going to want to look at those needs to make a change to a new ERP system that makes sense to everyone in the organization and rally around that need. If you're moving to a new ERP system, you are for sure going to get new features, new functions. Things are supposed to be easier. And so that's the kind of messaging you want to put out to everybody so that everybody, quote unquote, leans in to this transformation. As I mentioned, all change will be resisted, and that might be conscious or it might be subconscious. No one is going to want to have their cheese moved. And so when you create a great story, when you create a sense of togetherness and that everyone's invested in it, these implementations go much, much smoother.
That's, I've got a follow-up question. Actually, David asked that is, and there's certainly different ways we can answer this now and later, but, it's kind of a no-brainer. What does it cost to appoint and use GSI for a typical implementation? And I know that everything's different, but how would you answer that, I guess?
No, and I'm glad that came up, because I kind of sailed over it. Is that some of this investment and also, is a way to keep your implementation costs down. So an implementation cost can vary wildly. It can be relatively inexpensive if your organization is prepared, has all the right SMEs in place, has a project manager that can lift some of that load from your implementation partner. If, for instance, if GSI is doing nothing more than configuring your system and providing some leadership and some knowledge about how you should set up your business processes in NetSuite, that's a pretty small footprint for GSI. If GSI has to do all of the heavy lifting around project management, if we are the ones that are tasked with cleaning your data to move from the old ERP to the new ERP, then the costs can run up a little bit. I don't have a number, but I can work with anyone to understand what they're implementing and give them a thumbnail or a ballpark. But again, we can do implementations very simply, very quickly, and very inexpensively if those organizations take some of the tedium out off of our plate and onto theirs. The more work that we do, especially work that can be done by anyone, right? So your implementation professionals, they come at a rate that is commensurate with their experience. If we have them combing through your data to find faults in your product numbers, then that's not the best use of that individual's time. And that's something that we'll work through as we quote unquote scope your deal. So when you work with us to buy NetSuite or to implement NetSuite or both, we will look at your instance and your needs in particular, and we'll create what's called a statement of work. That statement of work will come over to you, and it outlines exactly what GSI is going to perform. And it'll have a price tag on there. And we can back that price tag down by working through that statement of work and moving more work internally to your organization. And it can become a very reasonable operation.
We had a question about the keep it simple slide. And I think it's a great question is there, across all the implementations, is there one that almost everybody, and I don't know if it sticks out like this, but one that a milestone even, or a phase that almost everybody underestimates, no matter how big or how small? Or there's something that always seems to be a curveball no matter what implementation you've been part of? Or is there a common thread there that almost everybody isn't prepared for this, or this always catches people off guard? And maybe it's trying to do this during the holidays coming up, when you have your resources, you've got so many things you can't control going on. I think that is good about those. You've got to have a phase 1, 2, and 3, and you got to have milestones. But anything that pops up, is something that almost you can almost count on will be a curveball for any group.
Yeah, I would say universally, it's probably data migration, right? So the data as it sits in your system needs to be massaged so that it goes into NetSuite cleanly. So the analogy that we use is when you buy a new car, you don't take all the trash on the floor from your old car and put it in your new car. What we want to do is we want to make sure that your data is ready to go into NetSuite. And with NetSuite and modern ERP, this is a much simpler operation than it was in the old days. NetSuite has tools that are Excel-based so that you have the skill set internally to your organization to look at your data. I'll give you a very simple example. Let's say back in the day, you had a 6-number product code, but 4 years ago, you switched to a 10-digit product code. And now you have 6-digit product codes and 10-digit product codes. When you bring it into NetSuite, you're going to want to put the leading zeros on the 6-digit product codes so that your product codes all match. Now, this isn't a technical requirement. Really what it is an exercise to make the data in your brand spanking new shiny ERP system clean and referenceable. The evil of moving to a new ERP system is moving free fields. So let's say in your vendor record, you use an open text field to put, reference numbers so that when you call into your vendor, you can reference that. We're going to want to move those numbers from a free text field into a field where that can be reported on, that can be tracked, and that can be used for an effective business purpose. So if you have a current ERP system with free text fields that actually has business critical information in it, that's another place where we're going to want to move that when we move it to NetSuite into something that is more meaningful. So data migration is a big one. I think, and I mentioned it earlier, I think that one thing that's overlooked sometimes because of cost is not enough training. I think that people feel that training is a soft area to reduce costs. In my experience, when you cut training or don't do the right kind of training, you're going to go live on the system, but folks are not going to know what they're supposed to do in the system. And so just because you're live doesn't make that system effective, and it doesn't drive your business forward. So, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. training and how your folks use your new system is just as important as an effective implementation.
You know, I found it fascinating, but you pointed out about, you know, the person who runs the, you know, the migration or implementation, and no matter what phase, doesn't have to be somebody who is steeped in NetSuite knowledge. And what do you base that on? I mean, obviously you've seen it happen, but you really talk about someone who's gifted in seeing the future and knowing the current systems. But is there something about temperament as well, or maybe comfortability with, you know, somebody who is already kind of has the street cred to manage projects well, or is it take somebody, you know, completely different that to run a project like this?
I think that's more art than science. I think that most organizations know they can think of a person internal to their organization that would be great to be that kind of functional leader. You know, NetSuite is a contained system and it's very user friendly. Back in the day when you actually had to put in SQL statements, you know, the true code to extract data, that took a technical expertise. But getting into NetSuite, once you understand how to move around NetSuite, then it's really understanding how the business translates to NetSuite. And that's not a technical role. Also, somebody obviously with a smile and a positive attitude, somebody that looks forward to tackling new challenges is somebody that's going to be great at this. And as we've seen, Mike, more often than not, NetSuite is now a brand in the marketplace that if you talk to somebody internal to your organization and say, hey, we want you to be a project manager on this ERP implementation, or we want you to be an administrator on NetSuite, more often than not, folks are like, that's going to look great on my resume. Yeah. No one's resume looks bad that they oversaw an ERP implementation or that they've administered ERP.
That's not going to be a ding on your resume.
Never going to be a ding.
And you know, with that said, you know, do you find that, I mean, do attitudes kind of shift and expectations shift? You know, is it important to have, even though, and you've got phases, is it important to have a start date and an end date clearly defined, or is it more important that you do a goal like this needs to implement and this function needs to be happening? Or is it, you know, better to say this is going to happen by a certain date? What do you seem to resonates?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. You're going to want to have a hard date for go live because project scope creep is a real thing.
Yeah.
Most scope creep comes from evolving your understanding of the implementation as the implementation is going. So a strong vision at the beginning of your implementation is very important, and you should tie it to a date. Now, it's not to say that that date won't slip because of whatever reason, but I don't think goal-oriented is necessarily the best way to go, because time just seems to go on forever. You want to state a goal clearly up front and tie a date to that, and do good project management so that things that might be threatening that date can be prioritized, maybe moved into phase 2 if need be. Also, the timing of your implementation might be critical. If you're a seasonal business and you have a busy season where folks are busy with other things, maybe that's not the best time to implement your NetSuite instance. Because it does take time. You know, there's a thumbnail that 20% of the project leadership team or the SMEs team within an organization will be spent on implementing their own ERP. Now, this will vary wildly, right? So some weeks it'll be 40% and some weeks it'll be 0%. But over that implementation timeline, about a day out of 5 is going to be spent working to get that ERP up and running over several months. And you're going to want to time that well. Another old adage that I don't think holds a lot of water anymore is that you need to go live on January 1st because of the books. That is not the case with modern ERP. We can import open transactions at any point during the year so that when you pick a date to go live, you're going to catch up on what's going on that year so that end of year accounting is not affected negatively by a mid-year ERP go live.
My last question for you is a little bit of an elaboration. You had mentioned videos, and I just wanted you to elaborate a little bit about that. You're talking about videos, not a wide-ranging, broad thing, but a lot of times to take the place of trying to get everybody together for a meeting, kind of a how-to, we need you to do this for this phase kind of thing, really straightforward 5-10 minute things, or are you talking about a bigger, more amorphous? You're really talking about videos to keep everybody on the same page when it gets difficult
Well,
to try to get.
I was talking about,
Yeah,
I was talking about training videos. So NetSuite does have a lot of training videos. So once you're in the system, and like I said, if you forgot how to cut checks, there's a video on that that you have access to. There's no videos on how to execute on a project implementation, because you need expertise, because every implementation is different. And so defining those goals up front, working with a partner like GSI to define those goals, get those on paper, and have a common understanding of what we're trying to achieve in what time frame, under what commercial circumstances, is what the upfront scoping is all about. And we will absolutely help you with that.
Yeah, great. Well, it's always an open conversation with you, and I really appreciate how energetic you are about NetSuite, and you truly enjoy working on the product and working together. So before we wrap it up, we just had one more come in from David.
Sure.
So one more curveball. You've been hitting these out of the park, but why NetSuite as an ERP system compared with competitors? I guess why NetSuite? That's the big question.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, because NetSuite was born in the cloud. The first line of code that was written for NetSuite was written in HTML. It was written for a web browser to be supported in the cloud.
Really?
Most of NetSuite's competitors have been ported from an on-premise solution into the cloud, and sometimes that can be exposed depending on what you're doing. But NetSuite is the oldest SaaS delivered ERP system in the world. It was the very first one. And what was cool about NetSuite is they got started on developing it before there was a real desire or taste for SaaS delivered ERP. Evan Goldberg, who founded the company, saw this coming. And there was a time when CTOs and CIOs had no faith in keeping their data in the cloud, but he knew that mindset would change because of the effectiveness, the cost efficiency, and the flexibility that a system like he was designing was going to offer. And that time did come. It was around 2013 where those covers of CTO and CIO magazine started to really talk about the security of keeping your data in the cloud. And it was around that time that NetSuite really, really took off. But the cool thing there is they didn't have to play catch up. They already had a product that was being marketed. They already had the backing that they needed. They had the money. They had a great product, and it took off from there instead of waiting for that market to appear and then porting the system over there. Mm-hmm. Also, NetSuite is completely committed to publishing great software, where some of those competitors are in different businesses. I'll pick on Microsoft for a second. Microsoft does have some competitive ERP products, but you never know what Microsoft is going to be up to, or if one day they decide they don't think ERP is profitable and they want to get out of the business. NetSuite only does one thing. It develops NetSuite, and that's all it will ever do. It is owned by Oracle, but it is a global business unit, a separate unit under the Oracle umbrella, and Oracle has allowed NetSuite to reach into markets that it couldn't do on its own. So now, instead of NetSuite being a dominant player in North America, it's now a worldwide dominant player serving the ERP market through its SaaS application.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great. Well, everyone, if you have any other questions, we can still field them via email. You can hit us up. At just, it would be spencer.howard@getgsi.com or mike.mcgann@getgsi.com, or as was shared earlier, sales.netsuite. And I will share that, but everyone's going to get a follow-up, a finished link to the finished video. So you can share with your family and for Friday night movie night. How's that sound? But no, we really appreciate your time, Spencer, but more importantly, we appreciate every one of you attendees for showing up tonight, and we will make sure you get a link to the video. So I think that pretty much covers it. Any final thoughts, Spencer, or anything you'd like to add?
I think that, again, I think I've threaded this message through everything I've said. Get excited about it. I mean, it is a true transformation. And while going through the process can be a little uncomfortable, what a new ERP system, a flexible ERP system, one that's delivered through a web browser instead of software, one that can be accessed anywhere, one that has a mobile application so that you can approve purchases while you're on the golf course. I mean, these are the kinds of flexible tools that I think the modern economy demands. COVID taught us that we're going to have to distribute the workload to homes, to remote locations. And I think SaaS served ERP is the tool to do that. And I think it's the tool to grow businesses effectively.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining up with us today. That will wrap up the video, and we really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much, and we really appreciate it. Have a great rest of the week, and thanks again, Spencer.
Thanks.